I know I left you guys hanging just a little bit on the last video, so today I'm going to take you along with me while I start Scarlet's undersaddle training. Scarlet has been getting a lot better about being haltered. She actually comes right up and sticks her nose in the halter. She did have a lot of trouble with me reaching over the top of her neck, but she seems to not mind too much now. Honestly, she's getting a little bit too big for her britches. I have been having to back her up when we're out walking around just so she doesn't get too brave. If you haven't been following along with Scarlet's journey, she does already know how to lunge very well both directions in an open arena. I can touch her all over her body. She has had her feet done multiple times. So today I'm going to be introducing a saddle pad to her. For these rather scared horses, I don't do a lot of actual desensitizing right in the beginning. I kind of think it gets them a little bit too scared, but now that Scarlet has all the tools she needs to be brave and investigate new things, I think it'll go a lot more smoother. Many people will do desensitizing with a flag, and I don't really tend to do that. I prefer to get these horses using their brains and then get the tools to figure it out on their own. Scarlet is a little bit fresh today, or she has some extra energy pent up. I haven't even shown her the saddle pad yet, and she decided to go over and investigate it on her own, so I let her stop for just a minute. I am asking her to lunge around in a circle, but if she gets to where she wants to investigate the saddle pad further, I'll just let her stop and see what it's all about. She's a little bit sassy today because she does have some extra energy, but I'm only going to lunge her around for maybe 5 minutes just to get her listening to me. I don't want to tire her out too much. I want her to be able to react if that is what she's going to do. So this lunging is just to reinforce some of the cues that she already knows. After I'm done with that little bit of lunging, now we can move on to the most exciting part. For the very first introduction of a saddle pad, I like to use one of these English style baby pads. Most horses will have a similar reaction to Scarlet. I do have this pad folded up in a pretty small bundle. That seems to really help these horses figure it out in the beginning. I'm just going to start out by simply touching her with the saddle pad and moving away pretty quickly. Scarlet has turned into quite a curious horse, which is awesome, so I'm going to use that today to figure out when she's ready to move on to the next step. As you can see, she is a little bit nervous about it touching her body, but she does want to go back in and investigate with her muzzle. Young horses, when they're investigating, do a lot of nibbling or chewing on things. That is kind of their way of discovering the world, so I'm going to allow her to do that if she wants to. If at any point she gets frantic and scared and starts running away, then I'm just going to dial it down a notch, but she seems to be doing really well so far. I do everything on both sides of all of my horses, so this is Scarlet's bad side. She is scooting away just a tiny bit. She's not quite as comfortable with me on this side. A lot of the training videos that I've seen on YouTube are pretty unrealistic. Good quality horse training is extremely boring for people to watch. If I had a mind to, I could make Scarlet react in a pretty extravagant fashion. But even when she does have a little episode, I am going to try and bring her right back into that calm frame of mind. While I am teaching her about the saddle pad today, I'm also reinforcing all of the work that I've already done that allows her to kind of figure things out on her own without getting frantic or wanting to run away. As a previous wild horse, this is really important for Scarlet to understand. Once she is comfortable with the pad folded up, I'm gonna make it bigger and a little bit scarier for her. As anticipated, when Scarlet sees the inside of the saddle pad, which is white, flopping around, she gets a little bit more nervous about it. Most horses will react a little bit more once you increase the surface area of whatever you're working with, so that's why I like to do it in little incremental steps. I certainly could have started out with the saddle pad this big, but I know Scarlet is a very reactive horse, so I'm going to give her a lot of opportunities to kind of ease into it. Even though I've been working with her with this same exact saddle pad, she does find it a lot more suspicious now that it is full-sized. I'm going to give her a little bit of time just to see it flopping around and figure out how it moves. Scarlet has never seen anything like this before. She hasn't ever worn a blanket. I have used brushes and everything like that on her, but this is totally different for most horses. Once she gets back in that calm state of mind is when I'm going to move on to something a little bit more scary. Since she is having a little bit more trouble with the saddle pad being full size, I'm going to be pretty deliberate in how I move it now. Thankfully, she still has her curious little mind out investigating it after each time I touch her with it. This is a really good indicator that she's keeping an open mind and is not terrified of the saddle pad. I cut out a lot of time of me just standing around and letting her investigate the saddle pad. Once she was calm with it, I opened it up and started kind of lightly tossing it on her. And as you can see here, she still is pretty content to just investigate it in between each little task that we do. She hasn't quite figured it out yet, and she's still in kind of an investigating stage, so I'm gonna flap it all the way open and really challenge her to see how calm she can stay with it touching her legs or the underside of her belly. So far, Scarlet is being a star pupil. She is taking everything that I throw at her and keeping a calm and investigative mind. This saddle pad is super light. Sometimes I found with these horses, if you use a really heavy one to start off, it can give them a little bit more of the scares. You can see every time I kind of put the saddle pad on Scarlet, she's reacting a little bit because it is a foreign sensation to her. She's getting a little bit too scared of what I'm doing, so I'm just gonna pull her forward a little bit and then go right back into flopping the saddle pad on her. Like I said before, there is a lot of standing around that goes on in between. At this point, she is really starting to quiet down a lot. I can toss the pad on her and she's not moving her muscles or twitching at all. Overall, this is a really good start to our session. Unfortunately, today my back is not feeling great, so after she stands still for me to toss this blanket on her a few more times, I am going to end her session for the day. A lot of times this first introduction to a saddle pad, the horses can get a little bit squirmy and pull away, but I'm really glad Scarlet didn't do that at all today. I need to go home and ice my back so it doesn't get out of control, and this is the perfect place to call it quits for the day. Another thing that Scarlet has recently just started allowing me to do is to scratch the front of her face. She has been very guarded about this area just because of some injuries that she sustained when she was getting rounded up. Thankfully, all of her halter training has been paying off recently, and she's still able to stay pretty calm and collected, even though I just did some pretty scary stuff with her for the first time. Ideally, I would like to get her out a little bit later in the day or maybe earlier tomorrow morning and redo pretty much everything I just did with her. This whole session, I only gave her a treat when I put her halter on and then at the very end. With her becoming so much more outgoing, I don't want her getting into the habit of begging for treats all the time. From this angle, you can actually see one of the biggest scars she has on her face. She does have a little divot on the bone right there and also one a little bit farther up on her head. Thankfully, I don't think that they will cause permanent damage that will interfere with her career as a riding horse in the future. As I'm heading out for the day, I do want to check on Ziggy and Goose to see how they're getting along. It's been a few days and I noticed that these three roly-poly boys are kind of pushing Ziggy to the outskirts. I'm hoping I don't have to move Ziggy again, but every day I come in, it kind of looks like he's getting farther and farther away from the other horses. Because my back was hurting, Scarlet did get a whole day to think about our last session with the saddle pad. I spent most of yesterday harrowing with this fancy new harrow I just got. I thought about maybe not working her this evening because it is so windy, but I think it'll be a good indicator as to whether or not she is actually understanding what I'm teaching her. She is going to get turned out into the small arena for a while I clean out her round pen. Since the weather is nearly perfect right now, she is spending a lot of time out in her little round pen looking over all the other horses. I did introduce her to Frisco Bill, who she's been turned out with before, and Prim met her through the fence. I was hoping they might get along, but Scarlet did not like Prim at all. Scarlet has become quite the independent little mare, and Prim is kind of a needy horse. She really has a hard time being by herself, and I do not want that rubbing off on Scarlet, so for now she's going to get her own private space. It's a little bit late in the day now, and I noticed that Gus is already standing by his feed pan waiting for dinner. Ziggy and Studman are still pretty good friends, but Goose is still figuring out his place in that herd. Right when I was done harrowing, I noticed that Scarlet was galloping around her small arena. It has gotten quite a bit windier, and I think that gave her a little burst of energy. She still does test the fence quite often. This one is pretty solid, but I still do not feel comfortable putting her out on a wire fence yet. I haven't measured her in quite a while, but she is now going through a growth spurt. Her butt is a little bit higher than her withers. She's been getting half grass hay, half alfalfa because I really don't want her growing too fast. With her only just turning 2 in July, she still has quite a bit of growing to do before she's mature. If she was a kind of quieter horse, I would feel fine just turning her out and letting her grow up for another year, but she is really outgoing now and curious, and she does need to be in regular training in order to stay out of trouble. A horse like Scarlet needs to have something to do, otherwise they get really bored just being a horse. Because she can still be pretty reactive, there is no reason why I can't start in with more of the meat and potatoes of her training. I've noticed recently that when she gets frustrated, she'll start to bite on the fencing. I do think she has enjoyed being worked with more regularly recently. For today, I'm getting the regular saddle pad that I use when I actually start these guys under saddle. Another thing that I brought in the round pen with me today is a surcingle. This technically is just 2 cinches that I'm using together. I set it up just like you would a saddle. There's an off billet and then a latigo on one side. For a really feely reactive horse like Scarlet, I like to use this before I put a real saddle on them. It's just a lot less to think about, and they can get used to something being around their body before they have to worry about stirrups, flapping around, and carrying a heavy saddle. Something that's pretty common I see all the time is people using a rope around their horse's barrel. And while you can do that, I much prefer using a surcingle. You get the horse used to the whole process of getting saddled, and you can apply steady pressure to them all the time and they can just figure it out on their own. When you use a rope around their barrel, they can certainly get rope burn. It's very hard to release the pressure when they do something right, and I kind of want my horses to know that that pressure for the saddle or whatever they're carrying is not going to be released at any point. So for me, this just fits in a lot better with my whole program. Scarlet is doing really well with this bigger saddle pad today. She's a little bit nervous when it blows through the air. Again, I do spend a lot of time just letting her investigate the saddle pad and calm down at her own pace. Once she's pretty calm and relaxed, I just start back in wherever I left off. I am going to start something new, and that is just letting the saddle pad fall off of her. She actually had a very calm reaction to this. Most horses will kind of jump away and look at it sideways because they are not used to things falling off of them. I am not exactly sure why Scarlet didn't care too much about this, but I'm not going to question it at this point. I think this is a really good exercise to do just in case you go to saddle them with a real saddle and it slips off, they are not freaking out. When the saddle pad or saddle falls off of them, it kind of pops into their field of vision, which can be really scary for a horse. Out of all of the horses I've ever started, I think that Scarlet is having probably one of the best reactions to this, in that she doesn't really care too much at all. I think all of the work that I've done over the past almost 2 years is really starting to pay off with her, because things that would be scary to a normal horse, she is brave enough to kind of observe and not react, which is really what I'm hoping to do when I'm training these young horses. It keeps me safe because they're not trying to trample me all the time, and it also keeps the horses safe because there is less of a chance of them getting hurt. So far today, Scarlet is being a rock star. I am just putting the blanket on and off of her, taking it off the other side, letting it fall down. All of the things that I'm throwing at her today, she is accepting really well. Right when I'm getting into a groove, Tiny shows up to make sure that I'm doing everything right.
Tiny, you're gonna blow away. What are you doing?
It's pretty close to dinner time, and that means her time on the shaky plate is getting closer. She's gotten a little bit more impatient about it, and I'm pretty sure she's upset about the windstorm we're having. It's a good place to have a short little break and let Scarlet go in and investigate some of these things on her own. It was pretty interesting. As soon as I left the round pen, she went right up to the saddle pad and started chewing on it and kind of moving it around. A lot of people will put things like this in the round pen with the horse and just let them investigate on their own, which I think is a really good idea. Scarlet very quickly grew bored of that, so I knew it was my turn to come back in and start in with a new task for her. as soon as I picked up my cinch apparatus, she was really interested in what the heck it was. I do have some brass rings attached to it because I had used it for ground driving in the past. I don't anymore, but I left the rings on because they do make a sound that can be a little bit scary to the horses. For this part of her training, I'm just gonna go in and basically do the same thing that I did with the saddle pad. It's just a completely different object that I have. I'm gonna wait for her to investigate it and feel comfortable before I go back in. This surcingle is gonna present another challenge for her because I am gonna be able to drape it across her whole back and she will feel it on her sides. Some horses, especially ones that are really goosey, do not like this. I am gonna do both sides and rub it all along her belly and underneath. I've never wrapped a rope around her belly or anything like that, so when I tighten this cinch up, it is going to be the very first time she's ever had anything around her. I'm going to slowly move along and start draping it down the sides of her body and making sure she's comfortable with it. She is being extremely good for this. A lot of horses, when they see something on their off side, will get a little bit spooked by it, and her reaction was nothing crazy at all. She basically just acknowledged that it was there and took an extra look at it without running away or getting too upset. Another part of this process that horses do get a little bit scared of is when you take this off. So I make sure to pull it right off of her so she can feel it on her body and also see it out of her eyeball at the same time. Once she feels comfortable with having it on her sides and me taking it on and off of her, I am going to put it on her back in preparation for me to reach underneath and tighten it up. Since I have never put this on her, I didn't get it adjusted quite right, and that's okay. I'm just going to take it off and make it a little bit shorter for her. I really think that if you're not able to put on and take off the saddle or a surcingle without the horse freaking out, then they are probably not ready for that part of their training. For the first time I tighten the cinch up on these horses, it's going to be relatively loose. I don't want the surcingle moving around, but I do want them to be able to expand their rib cage and feel that there is something on them. I've never had a horse react like this. She just kind of stood there and looked around to see what was on her. When I got her going, she was a little bit nervous about it and kind of wanted to back up into me, but once she started going, she really didn't mind too much. She scooted around a tiny little bit, but she didn't have any kind of explosive reaction. For this first time with the surcingle on, I'm going to make her trot around both directions and then see to make sure that it's adjusted properly and reward her for being a good girl. She had a very mild reaction to this, just one little scoot, and that was pretty much it. Just so she knows she does have something still attached to her, I am gonna make her walk around a little bit. She was intent on investigating the saddle pad again, so I let her stop and do that for a minute or two. She was actually being quite lazy, so I made sure to trot her around just so she could feel that cinch on her. I wasn't trying to get her to react, but I did want to make sure that she knew she was carrying something around. So far, she is being really, really good. I do go up and give the surcingle a little bit of a jiggle just so she can hear the noise that it's making and to make sure that it is still adjusted properly. For this first time, I do want to make her lope both directions. That can tend to make them want to buck a little bit if it squeezes too tight on their rib cage. This cinch is probably how tight I would have it if I did have an actual saddle on her. And when she went to lope around, she has been a little bit reluctant to lope. I think she's just a little bit nervous, but she does lope both directions for me. I could have certainly gotten her to buck if I were to cinch this up really, really tight. I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. This is wrapped around her rib cage. She does need to be able to breathe and take a big breath. So I think if you cut that off too much, it does get them really scared and they may buck a little bit harder. That is something that I don't think has to do with their actual training, but their physiology. If they feel they can't breathe, of course they're going to get scared and try and get whatever is on them off. I took a tiny break to get a drink of water, and then I decided I would go ahead and quote unquote saddle her up. So for this, I'm just going to put the saddle pad on like I would if I had a normal saddle out here. With the saddle pad on, I'm going to toss the cinch over her back like it was a saddle. Even though she won't be wearing a real saddle today, I am getting her used to all of the positions that I'm going to be in and how I'm moving around her to get the saddle on her. Since she's being pretty calm, I'm not really going to tiptoe around this part. I'm just going to cinch her up like I would any other horse, and she handles it perfectly. I did tighten it up a little bit more this time just because I do not want the saddle pad wiggling off of her for this. Because she's been pretty well prepared, she does not care at all about the addition of the saddle pad. In fact, I think she's probably more relaxed than she was the first time, which is awesome. So far, this has really not been a big deal for her. When I get a horse in that I think may be really reactive to the saddling process, this is how I always start them. It really can build their confidence because they don't have a lot of things flopping around, and it's a lot easier to get a saddle pad up on them versus a whole entire saddle. For the very first time she has had this done, she is being an absolute superstar. She has been able to keep a nice, quiet, curious mind this whole entire time. Now, lunging her around, she is relaxing and putting her head and neck down. This is really what I'm after when I go through the first session with these horses. Just to give you guys an idea of the time span that this took, I want to say altogether she was probably in the round pen today for 40 minutes. She also is not sweating. She isn't exhausted. I didn't run her around until she had no other option but to stand still. She's doing this all on her own free will because she is just enjoying the process. I think in the long run, this just makes a much safer horse for everybody. Through this whole session, I think this is maybe only the third treat that I've given her. I probably really didn't have to give her any treats today, but because this is a pretty big day for her, I did want her to have a positive association with it. She did get herself in a little bit of a pickle here. She is standing on her lead rope, so I'm just going to give her some space. She had probably the biggest reaction of the day and quieted down as soon as she realized it was just a rope that was around her leg. To get her back in a calm state of mind, I just lunge her each direction, just walking calmly around. One more little thing that I'm going to do with her before I put her away for the day is to bend her around to each side. I want to make sure she can actually see that the surcingle is on her and she has no problems with this. I think this is more than enough for this little girl today. Unfortunately, I had my camera a little bit askew, but you can still see that she handled the unsaddling process very well. No big reactions, and just to make sure she stays calm, I'm gonna go ahead and toss the saddle pad on her a few more times before we're actually done for the day. I think all in all, Scarlet did amazing for her very first session. So much different than the horse I picked up at the auction. With Scarlet done for the day, it is now time for me to check on all of the other horses before I head home. Scarlet has water and I gave her her hay for the evening. I did notice the crazy windstorm did blow down a piece of the electric tape that I have up.
Where's Pete? Where's Pete? Pete!
Looks like Pete is either hiding or something's up with him, so I'm gonna go check on him before I fix the fence.
Pete! Hey, Pete. Hey, buddy.
Pete has been doing so much better. He has been more accepting of my snuggles, as long as the other horses don't run him off. I do think these boys get a little bit jealous because they all really want my attention.
Pete!
It's really cool that I can just go up to Pete whenever I want now and give him a few scratches. It kind of looks like Pete is on the outs of this little herd. I have been contemplating bringing Ziggy over here, that way he can get more time out on the pasture and possibly make friends with Pete. Most of the time he is still doing okay over here, but I have noticed Goose has been chasing him around a little bit depending on what's going on. These boys did have a bit of a leaky water tank, so I did just get them a new one. Ziggy is getting along in here for now, but once they don't have access to the pasture, I have a feeling that Goose is going to pick on him more.
Goosey! Come on, buddy.
This dry lot is a little bit on the small side for 4 horses through the winter, so I might go ahead and move Ziggy in the next couple of days and just see how he does with the other herd.
Ziggy! Boys?
I am going to keep continuing to post videos of Scarlet's training, so if you guys aren't subscribed, make sure to do that so you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.